Every leader's journey is shaped by a handful of defining decisions, those moments of risk, doubt and conviction that influence their lives and careers. In this podcast, we get to hear the stories behind those choices. Welcome to Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. In this episode, I speak to the CEO of Franklin Templeton, Jenny Johnson.
My father told me, look, you're a family member. You need to work really, really hard because other people are going to say, well, if she only works that hard, I don't have to work even quite that hard. So you need to set that example.
As the granddaughter of Franklin founder Rupert H. Johnson Sr., Jenny has spent her career under the microscope of legacy. It's a weight she navigated with pragmatism and self-belief.
If somebody ever says, listen, it's really just too complicated for you, it's because they don't know how to describe it.
As a mother of five running a $1.5 trillion asset manager, Jenny chooses how to spend her time using one ruthless metric, its long-term value.
I try to think to myself 5 years from now, which of these things is going to be more important? And actually, if you did that, often there became clarity about where to spend that time.
These are Jenny Johnson's Executive Decisions. I think most young people need to try lots of different things in their life before they settle on what they want to be. Looking at your history, it seems from a very young age, I've got 14 written down here as well, you knew what you wanted to do, and that was join the family company.
It's funny because the company was very small. I mean, I was in college when we hit the first $1 billion in assets. So it had been around since 1947. So this was in the 1980s. And there was only one little period where I actually thought about doing something else. And it's not on my CV, but I was a double major in economics and physical education because I actually thought maybe I'd want to do coaching. But then I kind of decided I could volunteer for that and actually make a living and stick to the family business. So I did.
Obvious question. Why did you want to join from a young age the family business? I mean, it's an illustrious business. Your grandfather, Rupert H. Johnson, your father, Charles B. Johnson, they set up a fantastic business and grew a fantastic business. But why did you want to be in it?
I think it was kind of the purpose of it, right? I actually think my dad did a pretty good job of explaining, that what we do is help people to achieve whatever their personal goals were. And I just thought I'm very close to my father. He just celebrated his 93rd birthday. And it resonated with me. And I think I also loved the idea of working with my father. So that was probably part of it too.
It's a very interesting evolution. And going back to the founder, your grandfather as well, Rupert H. Johnson as well, the reason why the Franklin name is there because of Benjamin Franklin, yes, who espoused frugality and prudence in saving and investment. Is that kind of part of the ethic that you liked about it then, or you like about it now, or that you try to espouse now to the current set of employees and clients?
It's funny. So my grandfather was a huge fan of Benjamin Franklin. My father paid anybody who would read his autobiography $25. That was like the deal. He wanted all this because, he espoused such great, as you mentioned, great lessons. But I love to say, who would Ben Franklin be today? I mean, if you think about it, of our founding fathers, he was an entrepreneur. He was a philanthropist. He was a politician. I mean, he really covered he was a scientist. And so I think today, he'd be one of these people that would be leading the AI or, climate transformation or whatever, because that's just the kind of guy he was. And so it's actually a brand and a person that I think transcends time.
Yeah. And those qualities across, as I say, politics, entrepreneurialism, philanthropy as well. Who do you think would be the modern day Ben Franklin? I've got all these names in my head and no one ticks all the boxes.
You're exactly right. I used to kind of say Elon Musk because he's got the sort of science and innovation side, but he doesn't really have the political side. He doesn't have the philanthropy side. It's kind of hard to point to anybody. I mean, he was really a unique man.
So going back to your youth as well, easy to see these amazing figures in your life. But I want to throw one more out there as well. Ann Johnson, your mother. Oh my goodness me. And I was preparing my notes with my wife and she was looking at it. She was saying, wow, she is phenomenal. Forget about the men. This woman was a physician. She graduated Stanford University School of Medicine. She brought up 7 great kids. I mean, that is the role model, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, she, had 7 children. And somewhere along the way, she went back to college. She got married at 19. They had their first child at 21. She had 7 kids within 10 years. Somewhere along the way, she said to my dad, I really want to go back to school. And that meant with all these kids, you both had to really help out. And then she wanted to go on to medical school. She did her residency at San Francisco General Hospital, which is not located in the best neighborhood. And my father would be nervous about her getting off, shift at 2 a.m. So he'd drive up and pick her up there instead of having her walk through the parking lot. So the two of them, you had to help each other out. She sewed the curtains for the first Franklin building, right? The first office.
They strike me as a really modern couple,
Yes.
way ahead of their time, because I know what my father was like. I know what most men of that generation were like as well. It was about their career. They were the breadwinner, and the wife was supposed to bring up the family. That was their role. What your family went through was very 21st century.
Yeah, no, he was. Well, my dad also hired the first female general counsel in the industry. We had, before we did all these acquisitions, we had about almost a third of our investment people were female, which was like unheard of. You're talking 70s, 80s, 90s. Now we've done a lot of acquisitions and those companies didn't have the same percentage. So we're back to kind of more market neutral. But I think my dad was always very progressive that way. And my mom, they both saw it as got to keep each other happy. And
what did they think about their daughter wanting to go in the family business?
Well, I think they love the fact that I'm in the family business.
But you were the only one of the siblings who wanted to originally, is that right?
Originally, yeah. But everybody did at some point. You needed a job, everybody went to work for the family business at some point.
But they were really supportive.
Oh, very much, yeah.
How do you feel about working for the family business? There is always that accusation when you get a child of a very successful person or going into the family business that there's the whole Nepo conversation as well. That's something you've addressed as well. Just tell us about how you feel about that.
Look, and there's always going to be people's view on however you got the job, right? And so, that's kind of noise that I think you can't spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think about it. To me, my father told me, look, you're a family member. You need to work really, really hard because other people are going to say, well, if she only works that hard, I don't have to work even quite that hard. So you need to set that example. And that was told to all of us when we came, and started working in the company. And then it's really about a responsibility. My father always said, take care of the client and the business takes care of itself. He said, I never really looked at the stock price. I don't worry about that. That'll take care of itself over the long run. What you need to do is make sure you focus on the clients. And so I think there were good kind of lessons in there. I think he's proud that, he has a child in the business. There are 4 grandchildren who work for the company now. And, we'll see whether any of them ever aspire to be the CEO or not.
Look, you can get through the door from family links. I got through the first investment banking job I got in 1988 because the guy knew my school and he went to a rival school. It happens. That's how it is. But to keep that job, you've got to work probably twice as hard as anyone else in order to prove that you aren't just there because of your family.
For sure. I think people have a bias that thinks, oh, it must have been easy for you. And to be honest, the board really put me through the ringer. I felt like it when they decided that I would become CEO. They put me through this whole Spencer Stuart, CEO kind of evaluation and how would you compare to other potential candidates of CEO? Because it's an independent board. We're a public company. The family still has significant interest, but we're a public company. And so not only for the record, but I think for them to make the right decision, they felt like, okay, it'd be great to have an internal candidate, but we got to make sure that she's up for the job.
Jenny, it clearly worked out okay. You've done incredibly well. You're an amazingly successful businesswoman as well. But that first decision post-university to go into business rather than going to sport, do you regret that decision at all? Because inside so many of us and so many CEOs as well, there's so many frustrated sportsmen amongst you lot.
So the funny thing is I actually coached all of my kids' soccer teams and I coached high school volleyball. I volunteered to do it, high school basketball. So I got kind of that out in that way. And then my family has an interest in a U.S. baseball team called the San Francisco Giants. And I was on the board of the Giants. And then my brother, when he retired as CEO at Franklin, he went and he's now the control person and kind of runs the team. And I always say he's a far better steward of that asset than I was. So I think he's happy and loves it. And I love what I'm doing here.
I know you love your company and you're great at what you do. But would you have preferred to have been involved in sport than finance?
No, I love what I do. I love this job.
Why do you love it?
So first of all, I genuinely believe that, and I don't think we do as an industry a great job of describing what we do, but we carry this responsibility of people's dreams, right? I mean, I tell the story about, so I have 5 kids, and I was saying, are any of you going to follow me into the business? And my daughter says, Mom, I want to do something that helps people. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is exactly the business that helps people. Yeah. And so to me, I felt ashamed that I wasn't better at describing what it was that I did to my kids. But getting up and being motivated, and I think that the people at Franklin Templeton think about that. You carry a responsibility because if you put someone in the wrong type of product, because either you haven't described the risk profile of it and it's not appropriate for that person, it can really destroy somebody's life. You know, they don't have enough they think they're invested a certain way and it's way too risky. As private markets are becoming much more popular among, individual investors and sort of the traditional retail channel, you really got to be careful about putting people in the wrong profile product. And when you hear people tell stories about you helped me save for my retirement, I invested in that product when I was in my 20s. And that has been so good for me. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for having that. So I just think it's a great business to be in.
What's the best decision you've ever made in your career?
Well, I got to tell you, I really love being CEO. That might be the best decision.
Yeah. Was it inevitable?
No. To be honest, I was the younger sibling. I was number 6 of 7. I was staying in my lane. I didn't really aspire to be CEO because I felt like if I were going after the CEO job, it meant that either something happened to my sibling that was in there or it was going to be a battle. And you hear about these family businesses where that happened.
We've all seen Succession.
Yep, exactly. People have said, is that your family? I go, no, I promise you it's
not. Are you
sure? Yeah, no, I promise you it's
Ever?
not. No, we're pretty good.
Okay.
And honestly, my dad is such a great man. He's always thinks about other people. And, honestly, I think we all wanted to respect the fact that he's given us this incredible gift. I mean, I'm honored to be in this position. Yeah. And, I'm not convinced it would have happened if it hadn't been my father, who was, one of the key founders in the company. And so what ended up happening is my brother had this other opportunity. And I do think that it's probably more men than women. I'm going to be stereotypical here, but who love the idea of running a sports team. I mean, I don't think my brother's ever been happier. And so he had an opportunity to do that. And so then it made sense for me to be able to move into this role.
Jenny, you strike me as a very strong feminist as well, and a very strong advocate of women. And I know you're involved in charities that get young women to invest as well. But isn't that buying into the patriarchy a little bit, saying, yeah, guys like sport, they're better at running, or they prefer running it as well?
Well, I didn't say they're better at it.
No, you didn't.
I just said that they might like it more. Again, I was on the board, so I was very close to a lot of the decisions, but I didn't aspire. Now, that's me personally, and I don't want to say that other women, I shouldn't generalize about it. I didn't aspire to run that baseball team.
Yeah.
I aspired much more to probably this job as a CEO.
So the CEO, standout, best decision of your career as well. What do you love about it? Apart from helping people, which you've already described.
Believe me, it's a lonely job. And there were other decisions that were important. Running technology was a really pivotal decision. And it was hard. I didn't come from a technology background. I started out on running technology because this shows you how old I am. I was given the job of e-business, and the definition was anything to do with the internet was under me. Okay, so anything to do with the internet. At the time, companies thought of the internet as a billboard, not as a communication channel. But over time, I just kept taking more and more of the technology, kept coming under me. And today, honestly, in a time which I would tell you that in my career, I have not seen the kind of pace of change like we're seeing now with AI and tokenization, that to have that technology background is such a great tool in the tool chest as a CEO, because I can comfortably talk about these topics. I have a strong view. I can sit there and talk to my CIO and my CTO, challenge them on how we're thinking. Are we pushing enough? That I think if you didn't have that background, it would be difficult to do. So there's a lot of lucky decisions, and then I made some bad ones too.
All right. Well, let's go through it. What's the luckiest decision you've ever made?
I would probably say ending up taking on that technology role because I really think
you had to learn.
I had to learn, and I got into the details. And I mean, I'll tell you something. Sometimes technology people, they'll say, "Listen, it's too complicated for you. Don't worry yourself. You know, I've got this.
Patronizing.
It's exactly, I've got this." And I'd say, "Yeah, I appreciate that. Humor me. Could you just explain that one more time?" And I just was relentless in trying to understand it. And ultimately, you know what I learned, and this is what I'd say to anybody sort of in a leadership role who doesn't have comfort there, is it's actually not that complicated. Technology is moving one piece of data from here to there, and then sometimes adding some data. So if somebody can't describe it to you, it's probably more their lack of understanding the technology than their ability.
Isn't that the Einstein quote that if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, then you don't understand it well enough yourself?
I think there's truth to that in technology. And so I don't think anybody should be afraid. And if somebody ever says, listen, it's really just too complicated for you, it's because they don't know how to describe it.
I'll remember that on CNBC. Look, you said you've made some bad decisions as well. Talk us through some of those.
I'll tell you, it's interesting. I'll tell you one of the hardest times I had at the company, and how ultimately I put it as one of my best experiences, learning experiences. So we had a bank, and we decided to get into the auto loan business. Let me just say, if you don't know who the sucker is in the room, it's probably you. We might have been that for a little bit. We were trying to build a loan portfolio, and we were buying it from finance directors and dealerships. And we ended up having a lot of credit problems. I probably will know more about auto lending than I'll ever know about asset management because I had to learn all the details. Now, exactly. And the regulators, we had a problem, and the regulators came in, and it was one of those where this teeny little business the regulators were coming down so hard on us that was actually affecting our asset management business. And I remember I would wake up in the morning sometimes, and I'd find myself literally in the fetal position thinking, oh no, I got to meet with the board or the regulators. And it was the lesson I learned is in some of those toughest times, probably the most important thing is just keep putting one step in front of the other. It can be overwhelming to think about how you get out of the problem, but what you can do is you can solve today's issue and you make those steps. And what you can't do is just freeze and paralyze yourself from moving forward. I tell the story about when I climbed Kilimanjaro and they say pole pole, slowly, slowly. Yeah. And on the last day where you're doing the peak, it was literally that, like, okay, 5 more steps. And I think sometimes when you're facing a really difficult business problem, that as you kind of lay out the framework, address what you have to address in front of you.
It's so fascinating listening to what you just said and the line you said earlier about it's a lonely place being a CEO, because I've been privileged to have a lot of these interviews now with amazing men and women like yourself. And people look from the outside as they're omnipotent. They're always confident. They've always got a great answer. But knowing, as I do now, how lonely the position can be and how mentally difficult it can be in those moments of crisis, and I've heard about moments of crisis from others as well, that is the toughest part, isn't it?
It is the toughest part.
Even making just normal decisions when you're under so much pressure. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, the funny thing about the CEO's job is the first and most important decision you ever make as a CEO is the team of people you surround yourself, right? Like, it's kind of like a sports team. I mean, if you're the coach, you got to put the right people in the right positions and field the right team. So if you do that well, chances are the only decisions that are coming to you are the ones that they haven't solved themselves, and they're going to be really tough decisions, right? And so there aren't a lot of easy decisions that get fed up to the CEO. So they can be tough. My dad always said, not making a decision is a decision in itself, right? So it was kind of a lesson that you can't escape from not dealing with it. You really need to deal with things head on. And then what you do is, if you have the right team, you really sort of trust and talk to them. And I think it's important to build a network of other CEOs that you can talk to confidentially about things.
That are peers and mentors?
Yes.
But again, you mentioned being in the fetal position. And I've known in moments of my career, when I was a trader, I made a howler and it was like everything went wrong. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to turn. What do you do as a mechanism internally, or who do you go to, or how do you cope with those absolutely horrible moments?
Well, first of all, you definitely have to find the strength internally to face it, right? So the first thing is you have to decide, I'm going to face this. And what do I have to do today? And that literally at times it was, what do I have to do today? I'll tell you a crazy story, which I didn't tell for years. We had a software, we were installing a new software, and it had some bugs in it. And it was something that was automating the wiring of when people did redemptions. We'd wire the money to their account. It was just automating that, and it kept having these bugs. And so somebody said, hey, why don't we flip this switch and let's try it tomorrow? And so we did it tomorrow and the next day, and it crashed after 15 minutes.
Your own personal Y2K.
Yeah, well, it crashed because it was looping the wiring, and it wired out $680 million. Wiring is good funds. And so, as you can imagine, at the time, that was more than a quarter's earnings for Franklin Templeton, right? I mean, it was a massive amount of money. It still is. And having to figure out how to solve it and just breaking it down into the small steps and it was as simple as like you had to call up, somebody, the little old lady who was getting her redemption. You said, I know you wanted 14,000 and we sent 1.4 million. Can we come to you and, will you go to the bank and sign it? So, there's difficult days and it's all about how you respond to them. And we got every dollar back. And as I said to the board, this is the challenge of every CEO who runs any kind of operations. Your test environment for technology is never exactly the same as your live environment. And so there's always a risk whenever you're updating or adding new software into your environment. There's always a risk in that environment.
When things are that tough, and there are always going to be moments like that, how do you balance your life? How do you still be that person who's there for your family, for your amazing children as well? Or actually, do you have to kind of prioritize and just say, look, I can't be the parent or the family member I want to be at the moment because this other decision, this other problem is just dominating?
Yeah. So I had kind of a trick that I used myself now my kids are adults. So now the problems are just more expensive and harder to solve.
Tell me about it. They're never off the books, are
they? They
are never off the books.
Somebody described themselves recently as a retired mother, and I said, oh, you're so optimistic.
Yeah, I got a 26-year-old son. They're never off the books.
Never, exactly. So I would try to, if I were facing a true conflict between the two, demanding of time, I'd try to think to myself 5 years from now, which of these things is going to be more important? And actually, if you did that, often there became clarity about where to spend that time. Maybe it wasn't so important at work. Maybe you knew you were going to be okay with your kids if you didn't show up at that particular thing. So that was one kind of technique that I used. And look, you're not there all the time. But the key is, are you there when it matters? Yeah. And I think my children would say that I was there when it matters and continue to be.
To be successful, you have to fail as well. You comfortable with failing?
You have to fail. And I actually think what's going to determine whether somebody's successful is not how well they do on their successes, but how well they dust themselves off from failing, and can they admit it early enough before it becomes too damaging that you can't reverse it? Like, you're going to try things as a company, you're going to try things individually, and you need to stay on top of it to make sure you're in the right direction. And if you can't admit that the decisions that you made are working out, if you're too afraid to say that wasn't the right decision at the time, I think that's when you're going to be in trouble. And you make decisions based on the information that you have at that moment. But, you'll gather more information. You have to be willing to pivot based on whatever information you have at that moment.
A lot of female CEOs I've spoken to have taken on board that not only do they have to be very good at their job, all CEOs do, but it seems that the women really appreciate that. Very often there's a lot of men saying, why has that woman got this job as well? But they also see themselves as a role model for other women as well. Do you see yourself not only as a very competent CEO of your business, but also a role model for other women?
I certainly hope so.
Is that important to you that you use your position as that? I
think it's important to me to try to mentor other women who are thinking through and aspiring to do, if this is something that they want to do. It's funny, I was just talking to a woman who was saying that she's being considered for a CEO role. And I said, make sure they know you want it. Like, I actually think that that's one of the mistakes that women women make is they don't speak up and say they want it. And just in my career, I will often, it is more often that you will hear men say, okay, I'm ready for the next thing. And what do you have for me?
Even if they're not ready for it, because that's in the male psyche. That's a very male psyche plus Wall Street equals overconfidence.
Okay, you said it. I didn't say it. So.
I said it because I've seen it 100 times.
And so, and what I realized as a manager of talent is, the moment that's said to you, it's sort of now on you, the leader, to say, oh, I got to find something, right? I'm going to lose that person, that talented person. So the one that doesn't speak up, you assume, oh, that's I don't need to worry about that now. They're okay now. And so I actually think it's important for women to speak up and say, I'm ready for the next thing. And chances are, if a woman speaks up and says, I'm ready, she really is ready.
Are you saying that from what you just said, that women actually need a bit more bravado to match
I think
the men?
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, there's this, I think that women will feel like, and I did it even myself. I remember my dad coming to me and saying, oh, maybe you should do this. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not ready to do that. And in the end, I think it was a mistake. It would have been better for the company had I done that. It was kind of managing some of the investment teams, and it was many, many years ago. But and I was like, well, I'm not an investment person, but I'm a reasonably good people manager, and it's about talent management. But I did not feel like I had the expertise to do it, and so I do think that that's something that women sort of feel like they have to have ticked all the boxes before they're ready to move into the role.
I've got a quote here. I think it's from you. Second generation guilty mom does feel guilt, but also sees yourself as a role model. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That is accurate. Great. So I don't see the reason why you should be guilty. But let me go with this. What needs to change in society to stop that?
So a couple things and thank you, because that is a great question. So number one, the reason I say that is because my mom was a working mom, I am really close to my mom. And so I see that you can be the child of a working mom and have a great relationship. Whereas if you're a woman who grew up with your mother always being there for you, you feel guilty that you're not there for, and so that's what I mean about that second generation. I'm lucky because I've actually seen that role model. I'll tell you I think the most important things that can really help women is if senior men say things like, hey, I got to run out of the office today because I got to take my son to the dentist, or I'm running out of the office this afternoon because I'm coaching my daughter's soccer team, or, whatever. That if men as leaders normalize that behavior, it will actually free the women a little bit from one, feeling guilty and not being able to speak about it in the office. And to be honest, for men, there can actually be a stigma of like, really, you're going to leave to go do that? Why isn't your wife doing that, right? Because if some of the senior peers actually have a stay-at-home wife, the chances are they're doing it. But I think that's where men can make a difference. And you can have the HR policies that say this is all okay, but people replicate what the senior leaders do. They'll say, if that guy was successful, how did he become successful that way?
So the CEOs who are your peers on Wall Street and elsewhere, they need to make the decision to say, I'm going to be this role model.
Yeah. And say it openly.
But we talked about bravado and machismo. Do you see enough of those kind of guys?
Do I see enough of them? I think it's getting better since, but again, society, you have to respect that there's some pressure on men to not actually say that. Right. And so that's where the leaders who have kind of made it, if they can normalize it, that'll be a really good thing.
There's no doubt about it. Your company and the whole savings and investment business is under a lot of pressure as well. And you mentioned some of the changes, AI, tokenization, crypto, what have you, private markets as well. What are the big decisions that you think you and your industry needs to make pretty imminently to stay ahead of those changes that are happening in finance?
So I think that two things that are going to be, in many ways, it's almost too late if you haven't done them. If you're a traditional asset manager and you haven't already acquired significant capability in private markets, it's going to be too expensive for you to do it because the differential in what a traditional manager trades at versus a private markets manager, because you have to be able to offer the full spectrum of capabilities. Yeah. And the future is going to be a combination of private and publics coming together in pooled products. You take the world of fixed income. I actually think that the future of fixed income you will have investment teams that cover both public and private, and that the best teams will have really good sourcing of deals built as part of their team, where they're going to be able to say to a CFO, "Oh, you're interested in getting some debt. We can give you a solution in the private markets, or we can give you a solution in the public markets." And so if you haven't built that capability, and let's say you're a high yield analyst and you're not aware of what's going on in the private markets, you're literally managing money with half the information. So I think that, one, having made the decision to go into the private markets is absolutely critical. And the second thing I think will happen is, if you don't have scale, you are not going to be able to compete with AI. Today, none of us are doing it really well. We're all doing stuff in it, right? But none of us have really differentiated in a way. But data is going to be critical. Franklin Templeton spends hundreds of millions of dollars on data. And if you're subscale and you can't get the data, you can't afford that level of data to be able to train your models, I think it's going to be difficult to compete. So those are kind of the two critical things. And then I think, we got involved in tokenization, and I think this is where my background in technology was really helpful. That's why I became such a believer in it.
Self-learned background in technology.
But exactly. But because I look at blockchain, and it's such an amazing technology that I genuinely believe it will replace the rails of financial services over time. And so, we have a tokenized money market fund that has some really cool features that you couldn't have if it wasn't built on blockchain. You literally get your yield paid to you in your account every day. Now, you're going to earn it in a money market fund, but you don't get to use it. Here, if you're a CFO and you've got hundreds of millions, even $1 billion of cash sitting there, you can actually get that capital to be able to deploy, because the technology allows us to pay it every day. We actually calculate it every minute. So to me, on the tokenization side, I think it's one of those things where it may be a few years before it becomes meaningful, but it's going to transform parts of the business. And I think you have to have the core knowledge in your firm to be able to understand, to make sure you're riding the front of that wave.
What are Jenny Johnson's best qualities?
I'm very loyal. I love being a mom. That's like the best. I love what I do. I think that people trust me. I think I'm pretty candid and honest, and I think people feel that. I don't know. I'd have to ask other people.
I'll ask your team after.
Yeah, exactly. You go talk to them.
When you're not a top CEO and you're not a top mom, what is the most selfish thing that you love to do? What did you decide to do for Jenny Johnson when you don't have to worry about anyone else?
Oh, man, I go and ride my horse in Montana and just feel like I've escaped. It's the best.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. That's superb. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jenny Johnson was incredibly warm and generous with the time she gave us for the podcast. She's an amazing leader who fully admits that she got her initial break from being a Johnson. The Franklin Templeton company was built up originally by her grandfather and then her father. So it's very much a family enterprise, and she admits that was where she got her initial break. But look, she's had to work so hard to prove she was worth it, at least as hard as others, possibly twice as hard to prove that she was worthy of that position and ultimately becoming CEO. Another really fascinating thing about Jenny is she's got these amazing patriarchal role models, her father, her grandfather, building up a really big financial company, but also her mother, a woman who's extraordinary in her own right, building up a very large family, looking after her and her siblings, but also studying at Stanford Medical School and becoming very successful in her own right. Jenny Johnson's story is both fascinating and inspiring. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on Executive Decisions. I would love to hear your feedback. Drop your thoughts in the comments or a review, and please hit that follow or subscribe button. You won't want to miss the next episode of the podcast, dropping on Tuesday, where I speak to the CEO of Schneider Electric, Olivier Bloom.
When I hear leaders who tell me, or managers, I know everything, I say, look, I think you got it wrong. Because the higher you go in a company, the less you know.